what's interesting is faith, hope, love, courage always face uncertainty.
Mm.
That if we're certain about something, then we don't need faith, hope, love, or courage because we're certain. And so part of this is that leap of moving towards uncertainty, that which is not known, that which may be possible. And so I love the fact that so much of this journey isn't being certain about the next right step. It's about being open to the next right step. And that we invite people and we have lived where we don't have certitude about what is next. We don't even have certitude about what the outcome is going to be. We are simply open to the possibility that this may be transformative. And that is the context of faith, hope, and love combined with courage.
Mhm.
Welcome to the Faithful and True podcast. I'm Randy Everett, your co-host, and we are here today with our regular host, Dr. Greg Miller. Greg, how are you today?
I am doing well. It's a very cool day in Chicago.
It is
Others
here
might think it's
too.
cold. So,
Yeah, it's the same here in Eden Prairie, where we've got the Men's Journey workshop for the month of February going on, and we have a good group, and it's going very well. And we are happy to be back again today with Josh Moon from our team here at Faithful and True. Josh is down in Tennessee, and we began a conversation on our last podcast with Josh, in which we introduced the subject of fear and courage. And we're back today to finish up this conversation about fear and courage. Josh, great to see you. Welcome back.
Yeah, thank you, Randy. Great to be here.
yeah. And as Randy said, this is a continuation of a previous podcast. And in the last podcast, we were talking specifically about fear and the role that it plays in keeping us held hostage. That if we give into that fear, we begin to let that fear define us, it will keep us from moving towards those things that are essential for recovery. And so we are going to be talking about fear and courage, but in the context of what it looks like for us to move forward, to experience transformation, to live in freedom. And one of the things I often say to men is that you cannot recover without courage. Because it requires that we do move towards some things that historically we have been avoiding.
Mhm. Mhm. That's right. And courage, by definition, is hard.
Mm.
If it's easy, it's not an exercise in courage. And so it's calling somebody into what we know is a difficult dynamic to be able to tell you to confront things, to face things. And we know it's hard. And that's why we use the language of courage.
hmm Well, and last time we talked in the podcast that courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is the decision not to be defined by your fear
That's right.
and to not let that be the thing that determines the choices that you're going to make. And one of the best things that we can do is identifying what it is that we are afraid of. Prior to Mark's death, I would hear him talk about that anxiety is kind of an uncertain dread. Whereas fear is something that may be specific we can name. I am afraid of this. And
Mhm.
so the clearer that we are about fear, then that gives us a direction for our courage. It allows us to be clear about what we are afraid
That's
of
right.
and what it may cost us if that fear is realized.
That's right. And I think if we keep pushing and say, okay, I quoted Thomas Aquinas a lot last time. I really like the guy.
Bring him
Um,
back.
Is
so,
he back?
yeah, he's back. Well, I'm gonna same quote though. So, but the notion of fear springs from love. Well, a fear of rejection, for instance. Well, it's a good thing to love being accepted. God actually created me
Mhm.
for a love of belonging.
Right.
And so a fear of rejection, if I can understand my fear, then I know what kind of courage. And if I understand the love, then I actually understand something that impels the courage. If I can
Mhm.
identify the love, then that can actually help me move into healthier ways when I experience fear. What do I do? That kind of question. Well, to show courage, I need to understand the thing that's worth loving and moving towards when I'm afraid.
Right. And what can be true is the thing that's right in front of me may not be the thing ultimately that
Right.
drives me towards
Right.
love. You know, one
Right.
of the things that we hear and one of the things that's true is many of us are very concerned about our images and our reputation. And so someone might think that, well, I'm afraid to tell my story because I would lose my reputation or my standing in the community, and people would see me clearly. And so you could easily draw the conclusion that somebody loves their image or their reputation. Well, actually, the reputation and the image management is actually a means to an end. What they
Hmm.
do love is to be included, to
That's
be
exactly right.
chosen, to be affirmed. And what they've been taught in their life is who they are is not lovable. Therefore, they've created this image or this reputation that they believe could be loved. And so, even as we're navigating this and understanding the role of love in our fear, it's important that we dig deep and don't just
That's
land
right.
on the thing that seems most apparent, but recognize many of the things that are right in front of us are just a means to a greater end, this greater desire, one of the seven desires that we have.
That's right. That's right. And for me, that was a big part of my story. I like to say I should have, I went to some pastors to try to get help at different points, once in high school, once in college, twice in college, actually. So three different pastors. And, they didn't know how to help me. They prayed for me. They told me, don't do that anymore. And be warm and well fed. And they did their best. And what's true is I should have stood on the roof and just started calling out for help until somebody could help.
Hmm.
But it was fear that kept me from it.
Right.
And it wasn't just a love of reputation, it was reputation. I was using that because if I use it like armor, if I use a reputation, people will think highly of me, then I can belong, then I can be safe in the world.
Hmm.
And so the love was actually a good love, but it was disordered. So it got
Right.
attached to a thing like reputation, which fear is gonna fear of reputation is gonna come up a lot in somebody's life.
Right.
And
And I'm just going to guess here, but my speculation is that you didn't have anyone modeling in your life standing on the rooftop screaming until
right.
somebody came for help. And
We
so
don't see
what,
that much. We
yeah,
don't
No.
see that very much.
what can be true is secrecy, image management, some might call it privacy, but that what can be modeled. And so we're taught by observing that there are certain things that you don't talk about, there are certain things that are not acceptable. And so it does take courage sometimes to even push against cultural and even maybe some theological restraints that we've been introduced to of you just don't talk about these things or
Mhm.
you don't do that versus this idea of in our recovery, we are willing to talk about whatever we need to talk about. We're willing to do whatever it is that we need to do so that we can experience the healing that we desperately need. One of the principles that we teach at the workshop is this idea is you do whatever it takes to be well, no matter the cost, no matter the time, no
That's right.
matter the energy, but you have this desperation that I want to be well at all cost. And that thinking that allows us to move towards our limitations, and many times those limitations and those restraints do come from our fear.
Hmm. Yeah, it makes me think of the woman who came to Jesus. She had what's the polite way to say it? An issue of blood.
Right.
So couldn't stop the bleeding. It wasn't just during her monthly cycle, but it was regular and had been going on for so long, and it made her unclean. Now,
Hmm.
uh, she couldn't go to worship. That's the big aspect of being she couldn't get there. She couldn't be a part of that. And a lot of people would have said, well, it must be some hidden sin or something like that. For her to come and try to touch the hem of Jesus' garment took an enormous amount of courage,
Right.
enormous amount.
Yeah.
And she did
Because
it.
part of the reality is to be unclean meant that you were untouchable and that you could not touch. So the
Right.
great
Because the
irony
fear
of the
was you would
story,
pollute. That's right.
yeah, the irony of the story is what it took for her to be well was to find the courage to do what she was told not to do.
Right.
And anytime you're kind of pushing against cultural or theological or even kind of the restraints and expectations of the church in order to be well, it is a very courageous thing.
Hmm.
And one of the things I believe and I experienced in my own life is that courage is like manna, that we cannot bank courage. You know, if we read the Old Testament, the
Store
way
it
that
up.
manna worked is it was just provided for that day. And if you did try to store it, it became rancid. Well, the courage is the same way. Each time I face that fear, I got to find new courage. But the reality is, I have the memory of old courage. And that old memory, that old faithfulness that God provided manna yesterday and the day before that and the day before that gives me the courage to trust that I can find courage today.
Hmm.
And that's when we're able to find that momentum. Each time it is scary. And that's kind of the nature of recovery. We are called to do the new thing. We are called to live different. And in fact, I often tell men if it feels comfortable and it feels familiar, that's probably a good indication that it's not authentic recovery, because authentic recovery is moving us beyond what is comfortable and familiar.
Yeah, it makes me think one of the joys that I have of my wife walking this road with me of recovery and doing her own work and the courage that she had to face into for herself and to receive me and receive my story, but
Mhm.
also coming to terms with her own story and some of her own life. Uh, we get to say to each other, and we do, well, we've done harder things than this
Mhm. Yeah.
every day now, because in recovery, a lot of the work we had to do in the moments of recovery was the hardest
Um,
kind of work we ever had to do. And
yeah.
it's that remembering, you know what, we've done harder things than this.
Mhm.
And it's not
Okay.
just remember, it's getting to remember with somebody.
Yes.
So kind of
Yeah.
that term of encouragement, like to put courage into, to give them courage. It's a social work. It's meant like any of the virtues, all of the virtues, classical virtues, are actually social things. They're not
Mhm.
just individual private things. Love, justice, hope. These are social dynamics, and we're supposed to experience them and know them in community. Courage is the same thing. We
Right.
need a community to encourage us,
Right.
not just in recovery, but certainly in recovery.
And what's true is sometimes we can't find the courage just in us,
No,
you know, and that's the power
often,
of the
often.
community modeling
Often.
it, supporting us, cheering us. And so to be reminded that we can do hard things. It's
Mhm.
funny, Beth and I have a very similar thing that and sometimes it's joking, just we can do hard things. But one time it was very clear. I was dropping one of my sons off at college. And I wanted him to understand. And so what I told him was, we do not know what's going to happen the next 4 years. And something incredibly painful, horrific, difficult may happen. And my hope is if that happens, you will include Beth and I, because
Yeah.
I think we have demonstrated that we're in it and we as a family can navigate hard and difficult things. And the reason I think that that could be meaningful for him is because we included him in our own journey of recovery from the very beginning. We didn't try to protect him from the work that we were doing or what I had done or why healing was necessary. So when
Mhm.
I told him our family can do hard things, he had a case study in his
Mhm.
own experience of what that means. And that's
Mhm.
Yeah.
that's why the sharing of our story with others, with community, with our families, because it does remind us that when life gets difficult, when that fear starts to overcome us, when our fear is generated by that thing that we love, then we can move towards that fear and not be defined by it. And that is courage.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Um, Greg, I would love to hear um, in your early recovery, how did you find the courage to do it before you had a group? Or maybe you already did have a group pretty early on. What did that look like for you? For you? I don't know this about you, so I'm putting you on the spot, on the air. Uh, what did
I
courage
think,
look like? How did you find that courage?
I think part of it is in the early days, that next right step is
Hmm.
so
Yeah,
important
that's right. Right
that
sense.
I didn't have community. I was pretty isolated for a variety of different experience for a variety of different reasons in my story. I did have one voice that was encouraging me and speaking and supporting me. And it really was kind of that literal, what is the next right step? I can do this
That's right.
today.
I
I
love that.
can, if I look too far down the road, it was overwhelming. It was too much. But I could do research on finding an SA meeting near me. I could reach out to this therapist that somebody had given me his name. I could find him and drive for that
Yeah.
first appointment. So it literally was, I can do whatever is in front of me in this moment. And then I also had the vision, and then maybe I can do it tomorrow.
Yeah.
You know, in the early days, you have to make your courage so specific to the next
That's
right
right.
moment, and
That's
then
right.
hold on to the possibility and the vision that you might be able to do it tomorrow, even if you're not confident that you can. And it's that step by step, next moment, next day, one day at a time, that begins to create some momentum because in the early days, I didn't have a lot of memory of strong courage.
Mm.
You know, I'm one
Mm.
of those people who I was caught. I didn't come forward and tell. And
Hmm.
so in that exposure, I was immediately finding courage. But I tell the story of how when I was in my first meeting where I was being challenged with the addiction and my secrets and what I had done, I was aware that they knew a very small portion of my experience. And I knew that this was my opportunity to tell more of my story. So even in that moment, I found the courage to share with these people more than they knew.
Yeah.
And part of it was courage, and part of it was self-awareness. That I knew me. I knew if I wasn't honest
Yeah.
in that moment, I would go back to hiding. And
Yeah.
so I saw this as my opportunity and I took it.
Yeah.
And that is one of the things I encourage men to do when you start to feel discouraged. Create that list of courageous things that you've done. You know, doing research online for a group, that takes courage. Getting in your car and showing up for the first time, that takes courage. Telling your wife something that you remembered after that full disclosure, that takes courage. And so one of the things I love about our communities, the men are able to celebrate each other's courageous acts.
Yeah.
We share, we engage, we support, so that that courage is ignited like a fire and continues to grow.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
It
Thank you
sounds
for
like you could have taken that right from the Wizard of Oz when the cowardly lion said, when you do
Yeah,
this, that's courage.
yeah.
yeah. Yeah. But I love that. Like this courage doesn't have to be this enormous heroic act, right?
Hmm.
It's the next right step.
Right,
Um,
Yeah.
it's I feel afraid, so what's the next little thing that love does that justice would do?
right.
What's the right next step in that? And I
Well,
can
and
do that.
it sometimes it's very simple, and this is one of the things that we
Yeah.
talk about at the workshop. Sometimes it's just the courage to be vulnerable.
Hmm.
It's the courage to tell
Mhm.
that story that you've never told. It's the courage to own that choice that you made. It's that courage to allow yourself to be seen or known in this brand new way. And
Hmm.
that absolutely is courage. And so the
Yeah.
courage is what opens up the possibility. And here's something else I would say. We don't always have courage. You know, we do this workshop every month, and at the end of it, one of the things I say to the men is some of you, while you have been here the last 3 days, have been open and honest. You've shared things that you've never shared before. I often say to the men, one of my favorite phrases is when a man says, I've never told anybody this before, and then they tell us
Mm,
something from their
mm,
story.
mm.
But what's true
Yeah.
is at the end of the workshop, some of the men are leaving and they weren't able to share all of their story. It did in that moment seem like it was too much, that their fear did consume them. And that's okay. We truly get to be where we are. But what I hope is maybe somebody in their small group did have the courage to talk about something they had never talked about before. And that man who wasn't able to share can take that memory and allow that to encourage him and invite him to the next opportunity to be open and honest about what is going on. So
Mhm.
even in those moments that we don't have courage, we can take the courage of other people and hold on to that and allow that to support us and encourage us the next time we have our chance.
Mm. Yeah. 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 And it illustrates this point of being able to hold on to the things that I want to love most.
Hmm.
And I'm just going to push on your language. Like, I don't know if courage is a thing you have. I know English, we say that all the time, but courage is a thing I like, it's a quantity of something. Like, I show courage in action. Like, courage always acts. And it's that. Uh, my daughter asked. My daughter's super intelligent. She's a little scary, insightful sometimes. She's a teenager and getting into her teenage years, and um, but she just asked me, did Stalin show courage? Which was such a great question. I was like, oh, my little philosopher, I just love it, right? And it's this strange because he talks a lot. She's learning uh, some Russian history in school, and Stalin considered himself as very courageous because of the hard decisions he had to make, letting millions of people starve in order to pursue this greater. But it's that aspect. Well, that's not courage. It might be a certain kind of courage, but it's like when you show love without justice, or you
Hmm.
pursue courage without justice. In that case, all the virtues work together. And uh, just kind of reuniting love and courage go together. Like
Right.
when you
Well, what is
experience love, when you show love, when you're willing to offer these things, love and courage are supposed to go together,
right?
just like courage and justice and love and justice and mercy.
Well, what can be true is we can taking a risk does not mean we're being courageous.
That's right. Yeah, there
And
you go.
so I can take a risk out of fear. I can take that risk out of a sense of scarcity that there's not going to be enough. Or that, remember in our last podcast, we talked about the two great fears, the fear of rejection, which is relational, the fear of being crushed, which is power. And so I can actually make choices out of my fear to try to impose myself into a
Yeah.
relationship or to be more powerful than somebody else so that I'm not the one that is crushed. So just because there's a risk involved doesn't mean that it's courage. In order for there to be
Right.
courage, I must be moving towards love.
That's
And
right.
that's the thing, that fear of not getting or being in that place of love. That's where I have to find courage to push against it to get to the love that I
Yeah,
desire and need.
that's right. And it's why when somebody shows love toward you, it's easier to show courage in the world
Hmm.
because these
Yeah.
things hold hands. They're meant
Right.
to hold
Yeah.
hands. And so, again, a plug for community and finding our way into community in a place where I know that I can be loved because that's so important for me to show the courage that I need to do this kind of work.
Right.
I met not long ago with a couple, um, a heartbroken couple, and it was their first meeting but they've been in the work for years, trying to do the work and again and trying to find help and again and it not sticking or not working or this happening or that happening. And I was listening to them tell me all of these things as they're both crying. They want help. They want
Hmm.
some way out of it. And I was just overwhelmed with the amount of courage that these two have shown over these years. Now he's got a lot of work to do. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But they were showing up together to try one more avenue of help,
Hmm.
and that they were there together doing that. I just said, you guys, so much courage. And you could, like, nobody had ever told them. They had never thought of this work as actually showing courage, of just showing up, but doing it together and trying again and trying one more, the right next step. Uh,
Right. Well,
because,
so based on what we're saying, we can say where there's courage, there's love. And where there's love, there's courage. And most of the great novels have that understanding of love and courage together. And we cheer and we root for those relationships and those places of love and those parents or those partners that defend and push forward and continue to move towards. And what's interesting is back to the hemorrhaging woman story. The scripture is very clear. One of the details that the scripture wants us to know is that she had tried a lot of doctors and she had spent all of her money.
yeah, yeah,
That
that's right.
that she was not passive in trying to
No,
find wellness,
The
and yet
solution. Yeah.
in that sense of being defeated by the absence of healing, she was willing to risk again, that move towards that using touch that she was told she was not supposed to do to find the healing that she desperately desired. And I really love that story. And part
Yeah,
of the power of the image was it was the touch of the hem of a garment.
that's
It
right.
wasn't even a big embrace. It wasn't
No.
a hug. It
So
was simply a touching, the
a brush.
grabbing of the hem of a garment that was enough. And
Hmm.
I do think that so many of the men and the women that come to our workshops and experience Faithful True, they're desperate and they have found just enough faith to believe that the touching of the garment could possibly result in some sort of healing and transformation. And
Mm,
maybe they're willing to do what every bone in their body is telling them not to do, and that is
mhm,
to risk and to be courageous and to be vulnerable. And in that vulnerability, be transformed. It's that where we started our last podcast, this idea that we have to be safe enough to risk enough, and that risk always takes courage to be healed enough that we're willing to try it again. And
mhm.
so the big acts, and what's true is sometimes we are called upon to find big courage because
Yeah,
there's a big fear in front of us.
that's right.
And there's many times it's just a little bit of faith that allows us to take that next
That's
right
right.
step.
That's
And
right.
kind of talking about the virtues, it's faith is a part of this.
That's right. It joins hands. That's
It's
right.
that hope. All of that works together in courage to find the possibility to move towards whatever it is that we've been avoiding.
Yeah. And I can't believe I haven't said this yet. One of my favorite things to say. I made it up, but I probably stole it from someone somewhere. But
Thomas Aquinas.
that's right, probably from Thomas. I mean, that would be great. It, but uh, courage is what faith, hope, and love wear in the world.
Mhm,
Like courage. So when you see somebody acting correct, it's what hope wears in the world. And so
mhm,
people often, how do I have hope? Well, actually, courage is the clothing that hope wears as it's walking through the world. And
mhm.
this way of it is the embrace of faith, hope, and love, and then stepping in,
Right.
knowing I'm afraid, stepping in. And I need others to help me sometimes. Sometimes I can only step in this far and try to brush the hem, even if I can't take full hold of the hem.
Right.
I'm just going to brush the hem. Um, but it's that work. It is courage, and we have to do that and give ourselves to it. And like all the virtues, the more you practice it, it's like a muscle. Talked about as my, the more you practice it, the stronger it gets, the more it becomes a default. And especially when you're in a community where you get that kind of work going, and you have a community that's showing courage and building the habits of courage, and then they're strengthening each other in it. And it's a really powerful gift when you find yourself in that kind of a community.
Hmm. What's
That's the
interesting is,
summary I was looking for. If you can top that, Greg, go ahead.
well,
Uh,
I
Can
do want to
always top it.
say what's interesting is faith, hope, love, courage always face uncertainty.
Mm,
That if we're certain about something, then we don't need faith, hope, love, or courage because we're certain. And so part of this is that leap of moving towards uncertainty, that which is not known, that which may be possible. And so I love the fact that so much of this journey isn't being certain about the next right step. It's about being open to the next right step. And that we invite people and we have lived where we don't have certitude about what is next. We don't even have certitude about what the outcome is going to be. We are simply open to the possibility that this may be transformative. And that is the context of faith, hope, and love combined with courage.
mm,
Josh, Greg, thank you very much for helping us wrap up this series today. I hope that this podcast will be as powerful as I believe it's going to be for men and spouses out there. We hope that if you're seeing the challenge and the courage to take the next right step, that you'll reach out to us at faithfulandtrue.com, where you'll find many resources that are free to you, like podcasts such as this, as well as the online information and registration to come and attend our 3-day intensive men's journey workshop. If you're a spouse of a man that struggles with these issues, that the Women's Journey Workshop is also available. And then we have 2 versions of the Couples Journey Workshops. All of the information is at faithfulandtrue.com. We'd love to have you come and see us and attend the Men's Journey Workshop, which we host every month. So please look into that, and we'll look forward to hopefully seeing you soon. In the meantime, we hope this coming week will be a week for you that's filled with many blessings and with great vision.